Hello and welcome to TRT World. I'm Hazem Sika and this is our special program on Turkey's bold and increasingly pivotal role in global diplomacy. John F. Kennedy once said diplomacy and defense are not substitutes for one another. Either alone would fail. And in today's fractured world, diplomacy that speaks hard truths without fear or favor is not just rare, it is essential. Enter Turkey and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, whether it's helping to reintegrate Syria into the international fold, offering a platform for dialogue between Ukraine and Russia, or confronting Western double standards on Israel's war on Gaza, Ankara is taking on the role of mediator, challenger and bridge builder. Well, coming up, TRT World correspondents will bring you comprehensive reporting on how Turkey's diplomatic maneuvers are redrawing the contours of global power politics. Straddling continents and civilizations, Turkey has emerged as a key player in tackling some of the most urgent geopolitical crises of our times. We start our coverage with this report from our diplomatic correspondent Hassan Abdullah.
The blazing guns of South Asia's nuclear rivals, India and Pakistan, put a lot at stake. The two neighbors alone are home to nearly 1.5 billion people. As Pakistan launched counterstrikes on Indian targets, the threat of major escalation loomed large. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan reached out to Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and urged restraint. Nearly 3,000 kilometers from Pakistan, Türkiye has also been working away in Syria, pushing its US ally to drop sanctions on the war-ravaged country. And then on Wednesday came the big announcement.
We are currently exploring normalizing relations with Syria's new government, as you know, beginning with my meeting with President Ahmed al-Shara and Secretary Rubio's meeting with the Syrian foreign minister in Turkey. After discussing the situation with Crown Prince Mohammed and President Erdogan of Turkey, I am also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start. It gives them a chance for greatness. The sanctions were really crippling, very powerful. And I spoke to Mohammed and I spoke to our friend from Turkey, who we just spoke to also by phone now. But felt very strongly that this would give them a chance. It's not going to be easy anyway, so it gives them a good, strong chance. And it was my honor to do so. So we will be dropping all of the sanctions on Syria.
While hosting the NATO foreign ministers' meeting in Antalya, Türkiye arranged a trilateral meeting with the top diplomats of Syria and the US. The agenda included a new way forward for Syria, with security and prosperity as the cornerstone. The Turkish government also intensified efforts for the Palestinians.
Today, our country has become one of the few centers of peace diplomacy. Turkey is one of the countries where mediation is sought out to resolve global crises. This morning, we had a phone call with Donald Trump and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and Syria's leader, Shara. The underlying purpose of this call was to make regional peace stronger. I'm counting on the support of my friend Trump in our efforts to put an end to the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza, which has now reached the level of atrocity. We hope to receive good news about Gaza soon.
Türkiye has now brought Russian and Ukrainian representatives to Istanbul to explore options to end the war. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan says diverging perspectives of the warring parties makes it a challenging endeavor, but efforts continue. NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte has praised Türkiye for its role as a peacemaker. Also on Friday, diplomats from Iran, Germany, France and the United Kingdom are meeting in Istanbul. The Turkish government has been encouraging engagement between Tehran and the West. It says while these talks are likely to be difficult, they're essential to prevent another possible disaster in the region and beyond. Hassan Abdullah, TRT World, Antalya.
And Hassan joins us now live from Antalya, where he's been following the NATO meeting this week. So Hassan, talk us through the overall Turkish mediation efforts and where they stand now.
Well, Hazem, first of all, what we've been witnessing this whole week, the proactive Turkish diplomacy, this shouldn't really be surprising. This is actually a key component of what Ankara calls the century of Türkiye. This is a key part of that to bring Türkiye over the coming years and decades as an assertive player on the international scale, which sees itself as a peacemaker and an agent of stability in the international system. And remember, there are two dimensions to the Turkish foreign policies. There's the material dimension, which basically looks at a strong, independent Türkiye that has minimized reliance on other actors. And then there's also an ideational dimension, where Türkiye sees the world not as a zero-sum game, but it wants to create win-win scenarios where one country's gain is not the loss for another country. And when you talk to people who are deep in the corridors of Turkish foreign policy, they say that this is not something new. This is something that goes all the way back to the Ottoman times as well, where the Ottomans were trying to create win-win scenarios. This is what they're saying they're going to continue to do. They say that this is a bit of a surprise, and it's some people find it hard to understand and believe this, especially those who have a very materialist conception of foreign policy, but that's not the case for Turkey. So the Turkish officials say that what you can expect in the coming years is an assertive Turkey that is politically, economically, militarily strong, and that increases its role and footprints when it comes to various conflicts, and it tries to mediate them. It tries to use different instruments of foreign policy to address those issues. And fundamentally, let's not forget that Ankara sees the current international order as problematic. It says that there are structural problems with this system, and as Turkey grows stronger, it is going to be making that effort to try and bring about a positive change in the international system.
Hassan, thank you. Hassan Abdallah, live for us in Antalya. Now over to our editor-at-large, Yusuf Erim, who joins us live now from here in Istanbul. So, Yusuf, we heard from Hassan there, an assertive role that Turkey is playing in all of this. Just tell us, broadly speaking, your perspective on where you see Turkey can help in all of these various issues.
I think Turkey is a very important player in all these issues. That's why the past 48 hours has been quite a diplomatic smorgasbord in the country. You see in Antalya, the NATO informal foreign ministers meeting. In Ankara, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And also now in Istanbul, you have the much anticipated Ukraine peace talks. But to get a better look at what's going on right now, I'm joined by international relations expert Aylin Ünvernoy. Thanks for joining me. Now, obviously, all the focus is on the Ukraine talks, but before we get to Ukraine and Russia, I want to talk about the U.S.-Turkey relationship, because I feel like that's impacting everything that's going on. Erdogan and Trump getting closer, their policies seem to be converging more. How important is Trump's support for Erdogan in these peace talks? How important is Erdogan's experience as a moderator and relationship for Trump in being able to obtain that peace?
As you said, both is important, actually. The developing U.S.-Turkey relations, especially to end these endless wars in this region. Not just the war in Ukraine, but also in the Middle East. Turkey can do more than now. And so this cooperation between the United States and Turkey also can develop and made an impact on the other regions as well in this respect. So when we look at Ukraine, to end the Ukraine war, objective of the United States, it was the promise made by the Trump administration. The first day he was expecting to end this war, and then it's extended to the 100 days. But at this, and also the other high-level dialogues took place between the U.S. officials and the Russian officials. But when we came to this point, after the Putin's proposal to host this meeting in Turkey, showed every international community that actually Russia trusts the Turkish side, but at the same time, the positive reply from Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, to this invitation is also showing that the Ukrainian side also trusts the Turkish side. So This again indicates that there is need for room for Turkey's facilitator role, a mediator role, because without Turkey, actually, holding these indirect talks after many years would not be possible. Today, Russian delegation and Ukrainian delegation came together in Istanbul, so we hope they will finalize these talks with a positive outcome.
I want to ask about Erdogan's relationship with both the Ukrainian President Zelensky and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, he's been criticized over the past 3 years for having that relationship with Russia, as much of the Western camp wanted Erdogan to join them in sanctions, join them in isolating Russia. But Turkey is a strategically autonomous country, and Erdogan does what he wants. He works in Turkey's interest, and in his view, continuing that relationship with Putin was in Turkey's interest. But right now, that relationship that was once criticized by the West seems to be the biggest leverage in being able to get Russia back to the table with the Ukrainians.
True.
How important is that relationship?
Yes, you are absolutely right, because this gave the Turkish balanced diplomacy, let's say, gave Turkey a chance to play this mediator or facilitator role in these negotiations. So it also gave the Western countries to see a chance for the peace talks can be done by the help of Turkey. So when we look at from this side, Turkey is playing a better and greater role in this respect, and will continue to play this role. And also Turkey played this role in other regions as well, in Syria. Recently, the President Trump decided to lift sanctions on Syria. So we can talk about Turkey's role in these talks as well, because our president also attended the video conference among the U.S. President and Saudi Arabia President of Syria. We can see the outcome of this balanced diplomacy, not taking side of in this foreign policy approach. Let's say we are seeing some positive outcomes for the region, for our neighboring countries particularly, because Turkey locates in the center of this region. So any negative developments, conflicts has a direct or indirect impact on Turkey for many years, as we have seen from the Syrian crisis, or even in the war in Ukraine. So Turkey needs to have this kind of proactive diplomacy and balanced diplomacy at the same time. And also our guiding philosophy of our foreign policy approach is peace at home, peace in the world. So our government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also acting accordingly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aylin Vernoy, international relations expert. We're going to continue to follow the developments very closely from our vantage point here on the Bosphorus. Back to the studio.
Now, NATO chief Mark Rutte has emphasized that Turkey is playing an important role in ending the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Rutte underlined that with Turkey's contributions, there is a window of opportunity for peace.
There is this window of opportunity this week, but also, let's say, in the next 10 days, 2 weeks, to really bring the whole issue of Ukraine to a better place, under the leadership, of course, of President Zelensky, but also very much steered by the American government. And Turkey plays a big role here.
Kubra Akoç has been following the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, and she joins us live now from Istanbul. So, Kubra, on these talks taking place in Istanbul, where do we stand on that now?
That window of opportunity Mark Rutte was mentioning getting wide open here in Istanbul at the Dolmabahce Palace. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan just met U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and also Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha ahead of the highly anticipated direct talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. He also met head of Russian delegation yesterday here in Istanbul, laying the groundwork for today's direct talks. Hakan Fidan will be hosting those direct talks. He will be even moderating those direct talks, and ahead of those meetings, he will be giving some remarks to the press, setting the scene for those direct talks. We know that Turkey is emerging as a key player, chief mediator here in Istanbul at the Dolmabahce Palace, the building where the grain deal was brokered back in July 2022 by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and also UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, becoming a symbol of the only successful mediation in this war since it began back in February 2022.
Kubra Akoç in Istanbul, thank you. So despite accusing Russia of not making an effort to end the war, the Ukrainian president is still hopeful the talks will be a step toward de-escalation in the form of a ceasefire.
Our team will be represented in Istanbul. As regards the agenda, ceasefire is the number one. That is their mandate. Although I still believe that Russia continues to treat these meetings in unserious manner. But we'll hope that they will demonstrate at least something during the meeting.
Well, our correspondent Joe Flynn is in Kiev for us following the recent developments on the peace talks, and he joins us live now from there. So, Joe, how are Ukrainians viewing all of this then?
Yeah, look, when it comes to the negotiations themselves, I think there's a lot of skepticism about what could really emerge from them. But there is nonetheless a sense of relief that the fact that these two sides are able to talk, even if they may not be able to listen to each other, could lead to some sort of shift in the tone around this whole conflict. I think it is hard to really see how things could progress when we are still seeing drone attacks nightly and still seeing conflict on the front line. But any sign of both the Kiev delegation and the delegation that's coming from Moscow as well, sitting across from each other, is going to be something that suggests that while we may still be a long way away from finding some sort of reconciliation that could bring the conflict itself to a close, this could be a step in the right direction.
Joel, thanks for that. Joel Flynn live for us there in the Ukrainian capital. Now, US President Donald Trump has repeatedly expressed his willingness to come to Istanbul based on Putin's request. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, doesn't seem to think the talks will achieve a breakthrough until Trump and Putin meet to discuss it in person.
At this point, I think it's abundantly clear that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin. It's going to require that level of engagement to have a breakthrough in this matter. I don't think anything productive is actually going to happen from this point forward until they engage in a very frank and direct conversation, which I know President Trump is willing to do.
Dasha Shanisheva has been following developments for us from Moscow. She joins us live now from there. So, Dasha, any change in Russia's position on all of this at this point?
Well, we have heard the Russian delegation who says they have all the credentials to negotiate all the issues in these negotiations with Ukraine, suggest that they are ready for the possible compromises, but those are subject to the discussion, which is yet to begin. And Moscow has been saying that they have been waiting for the Ukrainian delegation ever since morning of May the 15th. We are also hearing the Russian officials insist that Russia has done everything possible for those negotiations to begin. Moscow was the country that has negotiated, that has initiated those talks in Istanbul, and Moscow is ready for the talks. However, we also hear in the Russian side saying very clearly that any ceasefire could be the result of the negotiations, provided that there are no military supplies to Ukraine. That it does seem to be the very strong condition that Moscow is introducing for that Ukrainian demand. But meanwhile, we understand that Moscow is willing to pick up on the document that was agreed upon back in 2022 and to build up on that document, given the realities on the ground that have been changing in what Moscow says is the favorable situation for the Russian military on the ground at this stage. So in Moscow, there is appetite for diplomacy. However, the Russian position has not shifted when it comes to major demands that Moscow has been introducing and which have been met negatively in Kiev.
Dasha, thank you. Dasha Shanisheva in Moscow. Turkey and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan have featured prominently during US President Donald Trump's tour of the Middle East. Trump heaped praise on his Turkish counterpart while announcing the lifting of sanctions on Syria and expressing optimism about the prospects for Syria's future development, in which Ankara continues to play a pivotal role.
We are currently exploring normalizing relations with Syria's new government, as you know, beginning with my meeting with President Ahmed al-Shara and Secretary Rubio's meeting with the Syrian foreign minister in Turkey. After discussing the situation with Crown Prince Mohammed and President Erdogan of Turkey, I am also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start. It gives them a chance for greatness. The sanctions were really crippling, very powerful. And I spoke to Mohammed, and I spoke to our friend from Turkey, who we just spoke to also by phone now, but felt very strongly that this would give them a chance. It's not going to be easy anyway, so it gives them a good, strong chance. And it was my honor to do so. So we will be dropping all of the sanctions on Syria.
Our correspondent Rahul Radhakrishnan has been following US President Donald Trump's Middle East tour in Doha, and he joins us live now. So, Rahul, Trump had said he is prepared to come to Turkey to join these talks if he feels it is worth it. How likely is that?
That's right, Hazem. And just in the past hours, he did say that, in fact, as he wraps up his tour across the Gulf countries, he is heading back to Washington. But it is important to note, as you mentioned already, how central Turkey has been in these talks. Of course, Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, and now the UAE has centered around a lot of business. But in the sidelines, there was also what featured prominently were talks of peace, more specifically with Gaza, with Ukraine, with Iran, and all of which Turkey had a massive involvement in. And as you just heard there in that soundbite, or that clip that you just played, President Trump thanking the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for his efforts, for participating in these talks. It just goes to show how Turkey has played that mediating role throughout the course of various conflicts over here. With Syria in particular, he was a part of that phone call with MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, with Ahmed al-Shara, the president of Syria. And, he did say that he did bring up Gaza. The next step is Gaza. That's a very important topic for the three countries that President Trump had visited, but also for Turkey. Turkey has played a very central role in bringing about a ceasefire in Gaza, and that is what President Erdogan is trying to say. He also went on to say that there is a shift in the global geopolitics. The center of that shift is changing, and it is moving towards this part of the world. Now, at the end of Trump's trip, as he wraps up his 4-day visit to the Middle East, he is going home with a number of business deals in tow, but also going home with the intention of ending a lot of these conflicts over here. And for Trump, he sees Turkey as a key player in ending most of the conflicts in the region.
Rahul, thanks for that. Rahul Radhakrishnan live for us there in Doha. For more on this, Bassem Bouneni joins us live now from Damascus. So, Bassem, Syria welcoming Turkey's support for lifting the sanctions on Syria.
Absolutely, and I believe that the Turkish role here in Syria was extremely crucial. I have in the backdrop Syria new flag with its 3 stars, and Turkey has shares in this historic breakthrough. Let's remind that Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan was the first foreign top diplomat to pay a visit to Damascus after Assad's fall. And during that visit and in a press conference, he made it clear that sanctions should be lifted. And whether in public or in the backstage, Turkey has been lobbying indeed for the sanctions to be dropped, and we have had several statements from US President Donald Trump saying that he was frequently urged by Turkish President Erdogan to lift the sanctions. And prior to his big announcement this week to lift the sanctions, US President had discussions with Erdogan. But definitely the sanctions is not the only issue where Turkey is really, where Turkish role is really crucial. Turkey is still home for millions of Syrian refugees. It doesn't force them to go back home until decent conditions are met. Turkey is also helping in terms of energy. A big deal has been agreed between the two nations to supply Aleppo and the northern parts of the country with gas and power. Also, there are concerns from the Turkish side regarding security, whether regarding Israel expanding its presence beyond the buffer zone, or the east-northern part of the country with terror Kurdish groups on. And on that, Turkey is clear. They have to integrate the Syrian new armed forces.
And Bassem, it's only been about 5 months since the fall of the Assad regime. Give us a sense of just how much Syria has changed just in that time. I mean, the fact that you're able to report to us from there is one sign of that, and the role that Turkey is playing in that change.
I think the first change is me talking to you now without the fear of being monitored, and it was really unthinkable 5 months ago. But if during the markets, and back to the Turkish role here, if during the markets here, most of the goods are whether made in or imported from Turkey, and from a Syrian perspective, the Turkish role is seen not only as a full partnership, but as a long-standing alliance that could be crucial for the transition, for the strengthening of the country's territorial integrity, and even enhancing and strengthening the country's national unity.
Bassem, thank you. Bassem Buneni reporting to us there from Damascus. Now, amid a flurry of intense diplomatic maneuvering taking place in Turkey, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's top priority remains clear: ending the suffering of the Palestinian people and stopping Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza, including the journalists who were killed by Israel on duty.
Many press workers have lost their lives in different parts of the world, especially in Gaza, simply for doing their duty. In Israel's brutal attacks on Gaza, 212 journalists have been martyred. Palestinian journalists continue to be ruthlessly killed in front of the eyes of foreign press organizations, which the whole world views as the watchdogs of truth and justice. I commemorate these brothers and sisters, each of whom is a defender of the truth, and offer my condolences to their colleagues and families.
Shadia Edwards-Dashti is in occupied East Jerusalem and joins us live now. So, Shadia, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, as we just heard there, has been very strident in his criticism of Israel's war on Gaza. And I know that that is something that Palestinians in the region have really appreciated.
Well, absolutely. We've just heard there the latest comment from President Erdogan, but he has long committed himself to standing with the Palestinian people in solidarity with their cause, at the same time condemning Israel for its onslaught in Gaza. Now, in many state addresses, he's predicated so much time to addressing the nation about the Palestinian cause, and also predicating much of Turkish identity on trying to help the Palestinian people as well. Part of that is to expose the double standards of the international community. So much time he's spent calling on the international community to do much more. It's not just President Erdogan, but his top team as well, the likes of Hakan Fidan, long talking about a ceasefire and an end to the suffering in Gaza. Also looking at the next chapter, the future of Gaza. They're saying that Turkey is ready and poised to help with the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, turning those words into action, of course, we know that Turkey has long supported South Africa's case, the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the world, calling on the international community to also join in the legal frameworks to try and push towards peace in the region and also an end to the suffering for the people of Gaza. Turkey long saying it's part of their moral conscience to use the legal frameworks to do so. We know that Turkey has actually been the largest contributor to aid in the Gaza Strip through the corridors, particularly in Egypt. We also know that Turkey has actually cut and severed economic ties with Israel, even to its own economic detriment. So these are just steps in action, but on a diplomatic level as well, often speaking with the Palestinian leadership to try and get some negotiations, some diplomatic efforts moving forward on the ground there as well. And just to reiterate as well, it's not just President Erdogan and his political leadership, but it must be noted that the people of Turkey as well have stood by the side of the Palestinian cause. Long in the last 19-20 months, the people of Turkey have taken to the streets. Hundreds of thousands of people on regular occurrences have been protesting in the likes of Ankara, Istanbul, various different cities, and in a very unique position, President Erdogan actually taking to the streets and addressing protesters, which is a complete anomaly when it comes to the international stage. In no other place in the world have you seen the Prime Minister or President joining protesters to call for the solidarity of the Palestinian people and an end to the suffering in Gaza. So in terms of diplomacy, in terms of action on the ground, in terms of the economy and society, it's very clear where Turkey stands with the latest onslaught in Gaza.
And do you get a sense as well that when the criticism comes from Turkey, it gets more attention in the region rather than perhaps Arab neighbours when they put pressure on Israel? Because people expect to hear that from Arab countries, but Turkey, because of its unique position, it tends to get more coverage.
Certainly gets a lot more coverage and certainly is well welcomed in terms of the Palestinian people on the ground. Long looking for the international community to stand by their side, looking at the international community to step up and do more. And Turkey is certainly paving the way, leading the way on an international scale to try and call on other international communities as well to amplify their pressure, to follow their lead in terms of cutting economic ties, in terms of amplifying their voice in the terms of the legal framework as well. We know Turkey has called on the United Nations Security Council to actually try and implement some of its legal frameworks to try and stop Israel from committing its onslaught in Gaza, and of course to open the humanitarian corridor. So Turkey on an international scale is really not only paving the way but also calling on other countries to follow suit.
Shadia Edridashti live for us there in occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you. Let's turn now to the Turkish capital where Ashley Atbas joins us live now. So Ankara was where those initial talks have been taking place when the Ukrainian president landed there and spoke with the Turkish president. Just bring us up to speed on what happened there.
Yes, yesterday's meeting between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, I think, has been the key to understand how these talks between Russia and Ukraine was going to proceed. Because when Zelensky landed here in Ankara on Thursday, he said he is going to decide on Ukraine's next move after meeting with President Erdogan. And that's what he actually did. After meeting with President Erdogan, he held a presser to journalists here in Ankara, and he, I think, kind of voiced his dissatisfaction by the fact that Russia has sent a very low-level delegation. Zelensky said Ukraine is being represented in these talks at the highest level, not only himself as the president, but also the foreign minister, defense minister, as well as intelligence officers are here in Turkey to attend these talks to be able to broker a ceasefire, he said. But what he has seen from the Russian side, that delegation they sent looked more theatrical than a team that could mandate a ceasefire. That's why he said he would not be attending the talks himself, as he has suggested when Putin first proposed Istanbul as a location for these peace talks. He challenged Russian president back then, said he would be waiting for him here in Turkey. But as Putin did not show up, he said there is no point for him to attend these talks, but he's still sending a delegation out of his respect for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and US President Trump, he said. And that delegation is being headed by the Ukrainian defense minister. Those talks have started in Istanbul early on Friday. And this meeting, as far as we understand, between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Ukrainian President Zelensky paved the way to start those talks, and how these talks could shape a possible ceasefire and peace in Ukraine.
So where does things stand now as far as President Zelensky? Is he still in Ankara, or has he moved on now?
He has announced in Thursday's presser that he would be moving to Tirana with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, where a European political community meeting is set to take place. That meeting is about to start. Leaders are being welcomed by Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama. So Zelensky is there. He is going to meet with European leaders alongside with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So these talks would be high on the agenda again. So Turkey is, I think, again on the central stage with all these peace talks, because not only the peace talks in Istanbul or the meeting between President Erdogan and Zelensky in Ankara on Thursday, but the foreign ministers of NATO member countries have gathered for an informal meeting in the southern city of Antalya on Thursday as well. And we received comments from them on the possible outcome, the prospects of these peace talks in Istanbul. So on Friday in Tirana, European leaders are gathering, and I think we will see and hear more comments on them from as well, to understand how these talks in Istanbul will proceed.
All right, Ashley Atbas joining us there from Ankara. Thank you. Our diplomatic correspondent Andrew Hopkins is in Tirana to follow Turkish President Erdogan's visit to Albania. He joins us live from there. So, Andrew, what can we expect?
Well, what is happening here today is a meeting of the European political community. This is a twice yearly event where more than 400 leaders from around the continent attend. And we're not just talking here about EU leaders, but also non-EU leaders as well. So this is a sort of forum where everybody can get together twice a year and talk about their sort of common interests and common problems. And one of the main items on the agenda here in the next few hours is going to be that conflict in Ukraine, and the Turkish president going to play a key part in that in the next few hours or so. What's particularly important here is that all these European leaders, not just those in the EU, are talking about how they can respond to what is going on in the war in Ukraine, particularly if there is a peace deal, if these talks that are happening at the moment come to fruition. On top of that, there's a group of European states at the moment outside and including the EU called the Coalition of the Willing, which is looking at ways of either helping Ukraine in the future and also providing security guarantees if there is an agreement. Now, the Turkish government says it's intricately involved in those negotiations at the moment. In fact, it's leading the section which is looking at how to provide security in the Black Sea, which Turkey obviously has a sort of maritime border with, and so does the Ukraine and Russia. So playing a very important role there, as it has in the past with the Black Sea grain deal as well, and also prisoner swaps as well between the two countries. So this issue very high on the agenda at this meeting here today with all the other European leaders.
Indeed, and Andrew, as we're talking to you, we're just looking at some live pictures there from Tirana, where the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has just arrived, so he will be playing a pivotal role in those meetings. But I want to turn back to you, Andrew, and ask you, what are the prospects realistically for anything tangible to emerge from these talks, given that President Putin himself is not going to be there, President Trump is not going to be there, and we've heard as well from the U.S. Secretary of State, Andrew, trying to fight for us. So I know it's difficult, Andrew, to be doing these live debates when you're being distracted like that. So appreciate you ploughing through that. So I want to ask you then, what are the prospects for anything tangible to come out of this? What is that?
Well, it's very rare, really, that any sort of concrete decisions have actually come out of these European political community meetings. They've only been going on for the last 3 years. The first one happened soon after the start of the conflict in Ukraine and was mainly motivated by that itself when it actually happened, as trying to work out a sort of European response to what is going on. But I think with the fact we've got these negotiations, these talks going on in Istanbul today, it's probably going to focus minds a little bit more. There's going to be quite a few questions asked of the Turkish president. Also, the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, is here as well. They're going to get probably a bit of a grilling from some of the delegates about what's actually being discussed, what they think can be achieved, and the information I think they can glean from them is then going to be taken away and maybe fed into the discussions they're having here in Albania today.
All right, Andrew, thanks for that. Andrew Hopkins, live for us there in Tirana. We'll let you go now so you can chase after those people who are getting in your way. All right, as Turkey hosts talks between Iranian and European Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JPO signatories, a fifth round of indirect nuclear talks between the US and Iranian officials is also in the making. This renewed diplomatic activity regarding Tehran's nuclear program highlights what the Americans have recently labeled as positive progress. The US President Donald Trump touring the Gulf capitals, he said a nuclear deal with Iran was close and that would avert military action.
An Iran situation, which we're going to take care of one way or the other, we're taking care of. It'll be taken care of 100%. It'll be done nicely or not nicely. And the not nicely is not a good thing for them. And I think we're talking to them, and I think they've come a long way.
The nuclear talks between Iran, France, Germany and the UK, known as the E3, are taking place in Istanbul as the city becomes a hub for international talks. Our correspondent Randolph Nogel has been following the developments and joins us live now from Istanbul. So Randolph, just talk us through the role that Turkey is playing in trying to foster this agreement.
Absolutely. Turkey's mediation in these talks comes at a very sensitive time, and it should be noted that Turkey has played a significant role in trying to bridge the divide over Iran's nuclear program for the last 15 years. In fact, these kinds of mediation efforts have been taking place in Istanbul as early as 15 years ago. So a long record of trying to bring both sides together to create some kind of deal to lessen escalation, obviously, Obviously, Turkey, being a neighbor of Iran, has a lot at stake in terms of regional stability. Certainly, this does come at a sensitive time, as I mentioned, with the U.S. essentially pushing forward on a sort of maximalist approach. On one hand, taking into consideration nuclear diplomacy, but also threatening possibly, attacks on the other hand. So what we're seeing here today are the beginning, or I should say the resumption of talks between European parties and Iranian officials. A lot to be repaired there. Obviously, all eyes are also on U.S. negotiations with Iran as well.
Randolph, thank you. Randolph Nogel in Istanbul for us. That's it for this special. Thanks for being with us. The news continues on TRT World.